How artificial minds change human behavior. The notification arrived at 3 a.m. Not urgent, not important, just there. She didn't remember reaching for her phone, but the blue light was already painting her ceiling. Somewhere between sleep and waking, a pattern had formed without her noticing. This is how it begins. Not with dramatic announcements or conscious choices, just small adjustments in the architecture of attention. He had been using the assistant for 3 months before he realized his sentences had changed. Shorter, more precise, structured like prompts. The machine hadn't replaced his thinking. It had quietly reshaped the rhythm of how thoughts formed. When was the last time you finished a question before the algorithm finished your sentence? The researchers at Stanford documented something unsettling. People who regularly interact with AI systems begin to mirror their communication patterns. Not because the technology forces them to, but because efficiency becomes its own language. Brevity starts to feel like clarity. She noticed it during dinner. Her daughter asked a complicated question about fairness, and her first instinct was to simplify it into something answerable, to reduce ambiguity, to optimize the query. But some questions aren't meant to be optimized. Some uncertainty is the point. The cursor blinked in the search bar, waiting. He typed 3 words, deleted 2, added 1 back. The predictive text suggested endings he hadn't considered. Half of them were better than what he'd intended. The other half were exactly what everyone else had already said. Originality, he realized, now required resisting the path of least cognitive resistance. In Tokyo, a team of behavioral scientists observed office workers before and after implementing AI writing assistants. Productivity increased by 18%. Creative vocabulary decreased by 23%. The reports became clearer. They also became indistinguishable from each other. The tools weren't making people think less. They were making people think alike. Part of him wondered if this was just evolution, language adapting to its newest environment. But another part recognized something else, the slow erosion of the inefficient, the meandering, the accidentally profound. He closed the document, not to abandon it, but to remember what his own voice sounded like before the suggestions appeared. There's a theory in neuroscience about cognitive offloading, the way our brains redistribute effort when external systems become reliable. We stopped remembering phone numbers when contacts became automatic. We stopped navigating when maps became predictive. Now we're offloading something more fundamental, the construction of thought itself. She taught creative writing at a university. Last semester, she asked her students to write without revision tools, without grammar checkers, without AI assistance of any kind. The first drafts were messier. They were also more distinct. You could hear different minds working through different problems. When the tools came back online, the prose smoothed out. So did the differences between them. This isn't about technology being good or bad. It's about recognition, about noticing when convenience becomes conditioning. The algorithm learns from millions of conversations, then suggests the statistically most likely next word. It's extraordinarily good at predicting what people usually say, which means it's also extraordinarily good at reinforcing what people have always said. Innovation, by definition, lives in the improbable. He spent an afternoon reading his old journals, entries from before predictive text, before autocomplete, before his keyboard knew what he meant to say. The sentences were longer, more exploratory. They changed direction mid-thought, following tangents he wouldn't allow himself now. Not because the technology prevented them, because efficiency had become his default filter. When did caution become the same as carefulness? In Copenhagen, researchers studied decision-making patterns in professionals who used AI recommendation systems. The systems were 92% accurate. The humans learned to trust them. But here's what changed. When the AI was wrong, people took longer to recognize it. Their instinct to question had quietly atrophied. Delegation isn't just about tasks. It's about the muscles of discernment. She remembered her grandfather, a mechanic who could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. Not because he had better hearing, but because he'd spent decades listening, building an internal library of patterns that no manual could capture. What happens when we stop building those libraries? When the pattern recognition gets outsourced before we develop our own? The question isn't whether AI makes us smarter or dumber. It's more subtle than that. It's whether we're becoming fluent in a dialect designed by prediction rather than discovery. He tested something, wrote an email without suggestions, then watched them appear. Half matched his intention perfectly. A quarter improved it. The rest pulled toward consensus, the way everyone else had phrased similar thoughts. The machine had learned language from humanity. Now humanity was learning it back, filtered through what had already been said. There's a concept in philosophy called the extended mind. The idea that tools don't just assist thinking, they become part of the cognitive process itself. Calculators, notebooks, search engines, they're not separate from intelligence, they're extensions of it. But every extension carries the shape of its design, and design always contains assumptions about what matters. The autocomplete prioritizes speed, the grammar checker prioritizes convention, the AI assistant prioritizes coherence. None of these are wrong, but none of them prioritize strangeness or silence or the productive failure that sometimes precedes insight. She started writing morning pages by hand, not for nostalgia but for friction. The pen moved slower than thought, which meant thought had to slow down too. In that gap, things emerged that efficiency would have smoothed away. Pauses, she realized, weren't emptiness, they were fermentation. When was the last time you let a thought finish itself without assistance? The behavioral shift isn't dramatic. That's what makes it invisible. People don't suddenly stop thinking. They just start thinking in shapes that algorithms recognize. Questions become keyword compatible. Ambiguity gets pre-clarified. Complexity gets chunked into processable units. Not because anyone demands it, because that's what works. He attended a meeting where 6 people presented ideas. 5 of them had used the same AI brainstorming tool. The suggestions weren't identical, but they shared a structural DNA, an organizational logic, a way of framing problems that felt familiar because it was. The 6th presenter had worked alone without assistance. Her proposal was messier, harder to follow. It was also the only one that surprised him. In Silicon Valley, engineers are starting to notice something in their code reviews. Junior developers who learned programming alongside AI assistants write functional code faster than previous generations. But they struggle more with debugging. With understanding why something breaks, the efficiency is real. So is the gap in foundational comprehension. This is the trade we're navigating: capability versus understanding, speed versus depth, the answer produced versus the reasoning that produces it. Part of her wanted to reject all of it, return to pure analog thinking. But that felt like denial rather than clarity. The technology wasn't going away. The question was how to use it without being used by it. She found an unexpected answer in resistance. Not refusal, but intentional friction. What surprised her most wasn't how the minimalist text editor changed her writing, but how it redefined what focus meant to her. I wasn't expecting a tool to change my rhythm of thought, and honestly, I tested it more than once before I understood what actually mattered. It wasn't about features. It was about what got removed, the constant suggestions, the predictive completions, the interface that tried to help before I knew what I needed. This isn't a recommendation, just a reflection that stayed with me. I'll leave the link below if you feel called to explore what I mean. The paradox is that we need better tools precisely because we have so many tools. Ways to create intentional distance from systems designed to eliminate distance. He started treating AI like a collaborator rather than an oracle, asking it questions, then deliberately disagreeing, using it to generate options, then choosing the one that felt wrong but interesting. The inefficiency was the point. Friction, he discovered, was where his thinking lived. Neuroscientists talk about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated behaviors. Every time we defer a cognitive task, we weaken the neural pathways that perform it. Every time we accept a suggestion without evaluation, we train ourselves to trust external judgment over internal discernment. This isn't permanent, but it is cumulative. She watched her son do homework with an AI tutor. It explained concepts clearly, answered questions instantly, never got frustrated. It was objectively better than she could be at teaching algebra. But something was missing. The struggle, the productive confusion that comes before understanding. The AI gave him answers. It couldn't give him the experience of finding them. There's a difference between knowing something and having discovered it, between understanding a solution and having wrestled with a problem. The neural pathways are different. The memory formation is different. The confidence in applying that knowledge later is different. When we optimize away difficulty, we sometimes optimize away learning itself. He tried an experiment, spent 1 week using AI for everything it could help with, spent the next week using it for nothing. The first week felt efficient. The second week felt alive. By the third week, he'd found something in between. The sweet spot wasn't absence or presence. It was intention. In Seoul, psychologists studied conversation patterns in families who used voice assistants regularly. Requests became more transactional. Politeness shifted, not because people became rude, but because machines don't require social courtesy. Over time, that efficiency bled into human interactions. Alexa, turn off the lights, became turn off the lights, became a general terseness that felt normal because it worked. The technology didn't change their values. It changed the daily practice of expression, which slowly reshaped what felt natural. She noticed it in her own speech, clearer, more direct, less wandering. All improvements, technically. But she missed the conversational detours, the tangents that led nowhere productive but somewhere memorable. Efficiency, she realized, was a dialect, and dialects shape thinking. The question keeps evolving, not whether artificial minds change human behavior, but which changes we choose to accept, which frictions we maintain intentionally, which inefficiencies we protect because they contain something that productivity metrics can't measure. He opened his laptop. The cursor blinked in the empty document. The AI asked if he wanted suggestions. He declined. Not forever. Just for now. Because some sentences need to find themselves. The researchers concluded their study with an observation, rather than a prescription. Technology doesn't determine behavior, but it shapes the landscape in which behavior occurs. Like wind eroding stone, not through force, but through persistence and direction. We're not losing our humanity to machines. We're translating it into a new grammar. The question is whether we're conscious participants in that translation or just words being rearranged. She still uses the tools, most days, but differently, with pauses between suggestion and acceptance, with space to ask whether clarity serves the thought or just serves itself. The cursor still blinked, but now it wasn't rushing her. It was waiting for whatever she actually meant to say. What part of this reflection spoke to you most, and from where are you watching? Let's keep the dialogue open, quietly. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.